towards a complex theory of language on the importance of post-structural critique within the practice of symbolic interaction. Before discussing the possibility of conceiving language as complex and before acknowledging the boundaries of practice of symbolic interaction and recent post-structural critiques of discourse and meaning-making, the emergence of these conceptual tools needs to be situated. Thus, they delineate the polemics, dialogues, and struggles that interactions had with functionalists and structuralists with structuralists without making an equation of the two. The first is rooted within the North Academy, in particular, the critique of functionalism. The second is a French phenomenon that has carried over to the United States, spanning avant-garde philosophy and literary criticism. Then I will proceed to establish the interconnection between both structuralism and interactionism to propose the possibility of a complex notion of discourse as a footing for both social theory premised on interaction and a post-structural critique of meaning-making and interpretation beyond appropriative modes of representation. Key to understanding the relation between symbolic interactionists will emerge from American pragmatist traditions and fundamentalist schools, which influenced German thinkers is influenced by German thinkers such as Weber. First translated by Parson, is a different conception of agency and the social. For Parsons, two versions of the social act can be discerned. First was a theory of general action, and it is later modified in economy and society. I will now detail the Parsonian theory of social action and its process of conception. I will summarize it though. The Parsonian theory of action is determined through four basic components that separate action and behavior. This theory of action implies A, the existence of actors and situations of action and the orientation of the actor towards the situations. Actors are defined as empirical systems of action that can be individual and collective and serve as a point of reference for the resulting action. Situations are meaningful surroundings for the actor defining his or her relation to the situation. B, the actor is either an individual or collective system of action, meaning a group that serves as a point of reference, such as a subject or an object. C, each situation where action takes place can be divided into social, which are the conditions that actor subject can affect or influence, the non-social, that is, those that she cannot, objects. Finally, the actor establishes a particular orientation in the situation in relation to non-social objects through his or her motivation, meaning need dependent, or evaluative, meaning weight, norms, standards, criteria, orientation. A few limitations of functionalist theory of action are described here. First, it separates and subordinates actions thought, and as a result, micro to macro modes of analysis and the process where the act is derived, functioning, orienting, and ending. Second, it supposes a particular whole-part relationship between the individual macro and society discourse thought macro, micro, macro. Third, it delimits action to be effect of human agents emerged in the process of delineating, that is, a person can be either subject or social, but things can only be non-social objects. Finally, bifurcating a situation into elements or variables can be manipulated to those that need to be taken into account but not being manipulated. It establishes the act as a singular discrete event. By identifying the act with the event, with the outcome of functionalism, disregards the process through which acts become events, and that counts that is through the discourse linguistic meaning-making dimension, which, since when acts occur, they are inseparable from the rest of the flow of activity. Dealing with some of the limitations of symbolic interactionism inspired by pragmatism and pragmatist philosophy, has argued for continuity between thought and action between micro and macro levels of analysis. As such, no action can be thought to be in isolation from other acts, thoughts, processes, ideas, but rather is embedded in a constant process of interaction between and among group members, between and among ideas, contexts, situations, things, persons. In Mead's words, the social act is not explained by building it up out of stimulus plus response, micro to macro. It is must be taken as a dynamic whole, as something going on, no part of which can be considered to or understood by a complex organic process applied by the individual stimulus and response. Even though Mead has addressed the limits of social behaviorism, which is the underlying functionalism, he defines the social acts of the process, not the Bloomer later understood the median process of action as interaction. In Mead's description, a social rules analysis can be discerned through such method and not concern only organic phenomena. An understanding of the relationship between multiple elements in a situation where interaction takes place and elaborates for whom and how interactions become meaningful. Social rules analysis can provide a method to understand and map complex intricacies of social overlay or ordering in its fluidity and constant stability, in providing a sensitizing theory that allows for telescope between micro and macro and can adjust different scales and topologies without erasing their differences. In moving beyond ecological, functional, and more recently network modes of relationality, social rules as a method can take advantage of the elasticity of complex to analyze and multiple levels of complexity. This flexibility stands in contrast to the methodological stiffness of functionalism. The conceptual differences between functionalism and interactionism can be located in ways that the view sociality, situatedness, and agency different. Functionalism imagines that acts to be simple, definable, discrete entities that can be predicted and that follow particular abstracted laws. They do is one in part and interactionism as processes insubordinated to the whole that establishes the outcome. The event as interaction is separated, is subordinated, differentiated from the whole, the outcome. On the other hand, interaction is perplexed by the complexities of the flows of activity and regarded it as unfolding new kinds of orderings, meanings, relationalities. These perplexities lead to adopting and inventing methods to describe, interpret such complexity without reducing it or abstracting to particular ends, orientations, functions. In Dewey's words, there is no immaculate conception of meaning and purposes. Meaning, purposes, functions, orders are contested and negotiated. So far, I have situated functionalism. I will next proceed to show the relation between post-structuralism and structuralism. I will propose how, even though the terms of the debate across the Atlantic can be different, the conceptual links between structuralism and structuralism, those of functionalism and interactionism, are similar. In this regard, post-structuralism and interactions are similar critical moments towards the knowledge's with the scope, with implications and replications of relations of dominance. For the moments, let me situate the post-structuralist critique of structuralism before juxtaposing and interrupting post-structuralism and interactionism. I will begin briefly with the intellectual account of French structuralism. Even though the ideas concerning structuralism and post-structuralism are not necessarily of French origin, French structuralists premised language as discourse to be a central element of analysis, using Fernandez's critique of the science to arrive at different processes of meaning-making than the advance by pragmatist philosophy. Specifically, pragmatist linguists suppose a direct link between the science and the record, the real thing, a principle that has become an element in symbolic dimension of interaction, viewing language as some indication is evident in Bloomer's definition of the methodological position of symbolic interactionism, where he states that the process of interpretation is twofold. First, the actor indicates to himself that the thing towards which he is acting, he has a point out to him. Second, by virtue of this process, indicating to himself becomes a these processes of indication and interpretation that have become of the symbol as an effective indication that links and stabilizes the sign to the referent. In the course of general linguistics, Fisher determined that meaning making occurs solely in the demarcation, in the dimension of discourse, that is, between signifiers and signifiers. The referent, really, the real, hardly enters the discursive dimension of meaning making. So certain linguistics can be summed up by a few basic principles that have carried over in structuralist works. The arbitrary nature of the signs, that is, there is no necessary relationship between the sign and the referent. Meaning is an effect of subtle difference between signifiers' worlds, either spoken or written, that are linked to distinct abstracted signifiers, visual images, portrayals, or abstract meanings. Finally, meaning is this an effect of a network of difference between and among signifiers, between and among signifiers. And lastly, the differences are subtle and binary in nature, that is, the difference is discrete and based on binary opposition that is established as an elementary union of language that split couplet of signifier signified. This were influenced by Saussurean critique of design and entered its premise into its own specific field. The most prominent and perhaps purely structuralistic example is anthropologist Levi-Strauss. He proposed a universal basis for language to establish an ahistorical scientific method of encoding and interpreting various cultural phenomena. Such binary opposition, man, woman, nature, culture, society, individual, became axes to describe and make intelligible most non-cultural, non-Western cultures. Critiques of structuralism emerged through people who were labeled initially structuralists. The most examples were being Foucault and Lacan outside anthropology, and feminist anthropology, most notably Chaucer. The critique of structuralism had to do with hegemonic assimilation of other social objects into structuralists' own terms and epistemological premises. Post-structuralists still emphasize the importance of language and modes of representation communication, yet they subverted its normative dimensions through uncovering structuralism's distinct interests, in particular modes of representation and assimilation. I'll concern myself with the full purpose and scope of structuralist critique that have come to compromise a post-structuralist turn. I'll then concern myself with those critiques that attempt to put forth a different process of meaning-making in language. Particularly, I put forth some concepts from the work of Foucault, Derrida, Deleuze, and Lacan. Based on the conception of the notion of a binary difference as central to structuralist meaning-making, Derrida proposed that discourse and marginalities and differences could challenge the hegemonic central hold on the structuralist binary, challenging the notion that logos, the spoken word, is the privileged form of meaning-making interaction. Derrida suggests that writing could undermine the nature of speaking. Writing for Derrida produces difference, which is not reducible and stabilized to binary difference of structure. Thus, the finality of structuralist difference is constantly differed and subverted. Derrida attempted to undermine the relation of the phallic hegemonic central term to peripheral ones. Go into Deleuze put the emphasis on the difference as Derrida proposed, but on similitude, not similarity, which implies an authenticated original. Difference for Foucault is a product of power that is evident in the authority claims present in both speaking and writing, that both have normative dimensions since they are effective incitement to discourse. Differences are embedded in the identity processes and modes of representation that relate part to whole in total fashion. The process of representation is challenged and this is not a pipe. It is proposed that through repetition, a day may come when the means of similitude relate infinitely across the length of series. The image itself, along with the name it will lose its identity, its equivalence. Campbell, 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 Campbell. As such, Campbell is not Campbell, is not Campbell, is not Campbell. To erase identity for Foucault is to be free from the gropings of power and rhetoric. Yet, is it possible? Is it possible to construct space not invested in the exercise of power that verifies these phenomena or establishes the construct difference, the power that is imagined as nebulous, never localized, being everywhere? A product of divine intervention, power can come to understand. Power, as we have come to understand, is more its most visible instances, is predicated on relations of dominance that are embedded in all types of relations, whether they are economic, sexual, analytic, instructive, interpretive, fictional. Relations of power are most evident and ritualized in the analytic scene. Lacan has delimited those relations of dominance, establishing the diffuse seat of power that divides to be the phallus, and that is not a fantasy, nor is it an object. It has it's even less the organ, penis, or clitoris, which it symbolizes, for the phallus is a signifier, which is designed as a whole, the effect of where being is signified. Where Lacan and Foucault are in accord that they propose words, discourses can produce certain positivities. Differences perhaps is in perhaps the most creative moments of transference are the plane where power lays. For Foucault, knowledge produced as discourse establishes relationalities of dominance. That is, the subordination of the individual to the social, vice versa, the male to the female, the periphery to the center, the late to the learned, and so on. Later, he became interested in types of mentality that may set forth different relations between power and knowledge. Like human psychoanalysis tends to play out power dynamics as a mode of relationality setting to produce functioning proper normative objects. Foucault is resistant to desire power that is predicated on a positive relation to the other, thereby establishing a secure relationship between power and interest. Certain kind of power assumed by people with whom they are unable to identify. The phallus indicates into binary, since the individuals exert power against masses and they're at their expense to the extreme of their death, their sacrifice, their massacre. Effects of power are a social work that is reproduced by cathexis of desire, aligning individuals and groups in ways that reinvent the multiplication of rationality of dominance. For these relations are to be successfully maintained by the power of ordering, they need to not always be in accord with individual interests. Rather, they need to proliferate themselves through discourses that label, legitimate, and organize their reproduction, institutionalization, and iteration into infinity. In taking on the Nazi situation, Hughes and Good People and Dirty Work proposed that Nazi movement created an inner group that was to be superior to all others, even Germans, in the emancipation of unusual bourgeoisie morality, people above and beyond the ordinary morality. This group of agents got at how to create such terror that it was best not to know. It is clear that it was and is easier to the conscious of many Germans not to know. Because not knowing helped to continue the work to reach the morally justified outcome or goal of a racially pure nation state. As such, the Nazi morality is morality par excellence, where the outcome or desired end does not have to map onto personal interests. Rather, this morality reflected and requested in certain instances utter personal sacrifices, such the moral impetus oriented individuals, desires, and erase the need to be individuals. So that any person labeled and turned as the in-group could produce its work. It is finally not unjust to say that agents were at least working in the direction of the wishes of many people, although they may have moved on beyond the wishes of most. Labeling was used to bifurcate in and out groups into constant persons and certain out-groups as devalued social objects, thereby tightening the consistency of the in-groups. This labeling process is most certainly a tool that underlies the division of labor, evident in modern situations as well. What is not so evident in structuralists takes on the label of signifier as the phallus of the product of discourse is the work, organization, the practice, method, and maintaining, constructing a label as a professional in a social group, as a nation. Here, I think It would be useful to draw on this comparison and juxtaposition of interaction with post-structuralism. Overall, post-structuralists emphasize discourse and the ways it has been put to power to produce legitimate knowledge. They have been emphasized the work practice, underlining the production of discourse as knowledge, whether it took the form of scientific, legal, cultural, literary, or religious. Even today, the science studies is focused on the studies of practices within the sciences. This dimension of practice has yet stressed by symbolic interactions in this studies of occupation profession, for example, Strauss's negotiated order and the coordination of work and Freisen's division of labor. In contrast, the symbol has had a particular life in the theory of symbolic interaction and is different from the critique of the sign put forth in post-structuralists. An example of how the sign has been used in SI is in imagining the interactor, which need not be limited to the human agent, as redoubling into the I subject, me, social object, precisely where a conception, a label, and a stigma can be located in case of deviance. Faux's work on labels suggests that they produce a continual work required to reduce the normal. Such work is where very much dirty work, is the erasure of the process of representing the process of normal as natural, something somehow always given, always already there, whose function is clear, rational, self-evident. For example, the individual work of racialization is to produce a racial label, double consciousness, and the veil by the processes by which such a split occurred in those in whose interests it operates. The double consciousness emerged between a particular social group constructs the individual as me and as I, partially a product of subject's own making and partially a product of a group. The veil that constitutes the I and the me is always present in instances where the two are not identical in racial, sexual, economic relations, as well as embedded in dominance strategies. The veil is a suggestive delusion that the person can occupy a position of normal where the social me equals the I, and perhaps the psychosis embedded in such a position or the neurosis in reinstating it where it fails. What hopefully has become clear is the interactionism and post-structuralism can be drawn together to help imagine governmentalities, rationalities, socialities, interactionisms, and relationalities. They need to depend on stable binary strategies of dominance. Thus, I propose that the conceptual differences between interactions and post-structuralist ways of interpreting and critiquing can be put together to conceive language as complex. By complex, I mean a discourse where what is constituted as social through negotiation, individual interpretation, and interactions, being without a sole product or tradition, nor only an effect of scientific discovery, but primarily an effect of work, of practice, as these products produces discourses. Both the theories of interaction and construction suggest conceptual orders emerge and negotiated, and are negotiated, not necessarily fixed and functional. What is the process? Ordering never quite construct fixed structure, language structuralism, nor are they limited by functional acts, functionalism. Instead, ordering through classifying in situational and interpretable on particular contingent terms and premises are part justifications and at some times part arrangements. I do not mean to imply that the complexification of language is necessary simply because sciences and humanities speak and relate to language differently. Rather, within domains of science and humanities, language is embedded in practice of maintaining through division particular forms of rationality, relationality that establish a profound and proliferate social institutions in which they are invested in relations of power. Where discourse is conceived as a complex foundation of the social and literary, it could be critiqued for its interest in it veils by the privileged modes of ordering and classifying. This critique can open up the space of imagined modes of meaning-making that acknowledge their investments in the practice of stabilizing contesting particular terms within discursive domains, structuralism or arenas, symbolic interactionism. If terms don't serve as labels but are open to order and deconstruct depending on a particular tactic and strategy, depending upon the location in a political field of truth-making, they can no longer require the double sort of consciousness, conflict fallacy, that has so far organized the knowledge field. Conceiving the subject not only as a discursive post-structuralism, but also an emergent form of interaction beyond the plain, the reflective resistance that is gestured, written, or spoken as a polemic, a dialogue, and an interaction, and is a product of the practice of functionality from which the subject emerges. Resistance, however, need not always imply dominant strategy. The subject can be imagined an effective interaction and resistance, as Buber has stated. The making of such indications, even though language may not be necessary, is a process of indication, is an internalized process to which a social process in which actors is interacting with himself. What is evident is the identity of the single unit as an individual and a consolidated group cannot maintain the basic name. Even situating him or herself is constantly negotiating, partly in conflict, partially in agreement, but never in identity with him, herself itself. In adding the dimension of symbolic interaction to social critique and representation, language can no longer be seen as passive imprint on previous interaction, polemics, struggles, conflicts, whether they are lost or won. Nor can it function to refine in other language, which foreground and unground unfold the term by which their interactions are impressed, understood, and misunderstood. They are portrayed through dynamics of a type of dialogue, never disguised as monologue, as the dialectics where answers is always already inferred or closed by the questions, because such strategy could be obsolete as number one, but rather echoed in the multivocal polyphony. The concept of discourse as an effective language has thus far proposed a functional representation that results in the split purification subject-object part-whole, imbued by particular relations of dominance or power. If the relation between theory and practice is complexified, as Lewis has suggested, relation no longer exists. There are only action, theoretical action, practical action, which serve as relays from which networks, and as relays networks, languages, as a binary matter. Networks have been the basis of power insofar as they have maintained discrete and replicatable. They are maintained discrete and replicatable. Cutting such existing networks of interest, desire, and power is a challenge of inventing different conceptions, practices, and relationalities. Another mode of ordering and interacting. This could lead us to understanding discourses as dynamic and complex processes of interaction without requiring linearity or progression evident in power plays between central and peripheral, between theory and practice, which is difficult but not an impossible task. To conceive of partial connections among players in the field is to attempt to manage alternative rationalities and governmentalities. Perhaps the work of Wittig, new types of relatedness can be discerned as a assault of the gendered heterosexual grammar of self-representation language, imagining pronouns, and is a first attempt to imagining interaction. Such an investigation needs to be extended, conceptualized, a conceptualized notion, numbering time, space, summation, reproduction, to name a few areas. Perhaps when she are envisioned, the effects of the nature means in a postmodern sense. To imagine me, I, it, of a cyborg who that is never the same nor different to conceiving King James springing forth from the ego phenomenon. Thank you.